Tell me when we're live.
Oh, we're live.
Oh, we're live. Well, great.
Yeah, everyone's in, or people are coming in.
Way to start a Teams meeting. All right, everyone. I'm Emily Miller. Thank you so much for being part of today's Electrified session. I am the founder of the Rebelle Rally, and on today's call, we have a great panel of people that have been very instrumental in making the Rebelle Rally Electrified program come to life. And so as everyone's logging on, we have an incredible group. We have well over 200 people, and honestly from around the world, people that have been following the rally, but also people from companies, manufacturers, great companies that are involved in the EV space. So it's a great group. Now, as we're logging on, I want you to go ahead and take a look in your chat box. We are going to be putting in a video of our Electrified program that's on YouTube, and that's a great video to watch. Gives you a lot more background about the vehicles, about the rally, about our Electrified program. So I'm going to go ahead and get going because we have a lot happening today, obviously, and we have a lot to cover in only 90 minutes, and I have a feeling time is going to get away from us really quickly. So who's on the call today? So we have myself, a little bit about myself. I am the founder of the rally, but I was a former off-road racer and competitor, driving coach, became a navigation coach after I really had to learn navigation as a driver. So as a professional driver for a manufacturer-backed program and team, it's fortunate that I got to compete around the world. I also own a communications and sports marketing company. And on this call also is Robert Mount, Bob Mount, from the CEO of Renewable Innovations, Christopher Michelbacher from EV infrastructure for Audi. Christopher, why don't you go ahead and raise your hand as I'm introducing you guys. So we have Lilly Macaruso, the special projects and prototypes engineer from Rivian. We have Dustin Krause, the director of e-Mobility for Volkswagen North American region. We have Mark Gillies, the senior manager of product and technology communications from Volkswagen of America. And so we have a great panel. Also today on this call, we have the teams who competed in the rally, the manufacturers who were involved in competing. And at the end, when we are basically doing question and answer, we have Nina Barlow and Terralyn Pettere, the teams that actually won the Rebelle Rally and PHEV. And it was great because they won the whole rally, not an EV class, the overall winners, and they can also answer some questions. So, like I said, we have a lot to do today. The meeting goals for today is to show you the Rebelle Rallies program and the people and the companies who played a crucial role in doing this. And I just want to give a disclaimer that I am trying to manage teams. Fortunately, we have Noel on the call. So when you hear me say, hey, Noel, that means I need technical support. And yeah, so hopefully I will keep this meeting rolling. The goals, you know, we've got the goals of the meeting today, but I also want to make sure that people understand that, you know, we want to talk about, you know, it's a very exciting time. We want to talk to you about how we built this rally, but then we're not just going to be talking about, when we talk about beyond the rally, which you saw in the meeting information, it's not about beyond the rally for commuter vehicles. We're talking about beyond the rally in terms of electric vehicles, but also using them the way people want to beyond the daily commute for adventure. They want to take and use capable vehicles the way, you know, for the reasons that they bought them for, not to just get back and forth between work and, you know, the store, etc. So what we're going to do also is at the end of the event, we are going to open it up to Q&A. So go ahead and put your questions into the chat box. and we will try to field as many questions that we can during the time. So, what is the Rebelle Rally? So the Rebelle Rally is technically the longest competitive rally in the United States, off-road rally in the United States. It just so happens to be for women. And it was launched in 2016, and 2022 will be our 7th rally. It's not a race for speed, but a competition based on points using stock manufactured vehicles. It's not for race cars, it's not for tube chassis vehicles. It is for the vehicles that people can buy, that consumers can buy, and that was very important to us in this process. It's over 200 checkpoints, 2,500 kilometers, using only a map, a road book, and a compass. And so I want you to kind of step back for a second and think about what that's like. You don't have any support crews. You have our support crews that are gang support crews. You have a map, you have a compass. You don't get your phone back. You seal it at the start of the event. You don't get it back till the end of the event. It's 8 days. You know, it's 8 days getting lost in the desert. Hopefully not getting lost in the desert. Not everybody gets lost in the desert. But that's really important to kind of wrap your head around that. You know, here's a great shot of Nina Barlow, who won the rally. She's a driver, but she really learned how to navigate because it's critical to be both a great navigator and a great driver in the Rebelle. We also kind of think of it as a triathlon of rally. So we use road books, we have map and compass challenges. We also have road book sections. We have a real-time scoring system. And what's different is that we are not a race for speed. That doesn't mean the rally is slow. Definitely does not mean the rally is slow. It just means that the point of the rally is not the fastest speed. This past year, we actually started on the Hoover Dam. Probably very fitting because the Hoover Dam is a point of electrification and power to the west. It's very symbolic. It's also going through an extremely challenging time with the situation with water in the west. We went north into Nevada, and then we spent several days in Nevada, down through California, and we end in Glamis, or the Imperial Sand Dunes, located on the Mexico border. So it is an endurance rally, and I want everybody to wrap their heads around this. It's an endurance rally. It is long, it is hard, and it's extremely challenging. It is meant to be, by design, extremely challenging. And what we did is we created a format to meet our goals, which also included in those goals a way to basically have an exceptional, responsible competition on public lands that respects our environment and is not just based on building the biggest, fastest thing that you can build to win a competition. I love this photo. Actually, we had 70+ mile/per-hour windstorms this year. That's actually the winning navigator standing up on the side of a sand dune, taking a compass heading. A lot of times people think, oh, the rally, you know, it can't be that hard. Then people get on the rally and they send us apology letters for not taking the rally as seriously as they should have to be prepared for the competition. So the rally is divided into 2 classes of vehicles, 4x4 and X-Cross. Here's a perfect example of them. On the left is an example of an X-Cross. It's actually a term we coined, which stands for an all-wheel drive vehicle, or a vehicle without a transfer case. And then the vehicle on the right, a 4x4, it has a 2-speed transfer case. We did not want, like typical racing, to have class after class after class, you know, or have a situation where somebody could almost buy their own class. You know, we want to be in a class of 1, so then we can win it and tell everybody we won our class. You know, we didn't do that. You know, we really, because it's not for speed, we can really classify the vehicles for their ability to tackle the checkpoints that we set. And like I mentioned, there are over 200 checkpoints in the Rebelle Rally. Not everybody's going to the same checkpoints. They're going to different checkpoints, and they have their choice of checkpoints that they get, but they have to get them in order. So that's an overview of the rally. There's plenty of stuff online you can go back to at another time. But hopefully that helps kind of set the tone of the thing that people are going to have to go do out there, that challenge that they're going to have to do. But we strategically designed it to be a proving ground for the vehicles that the public buys and that they want to use for adventure. And it has always been a plan since we started to have electrified vehicles. It was not something that we thought, wow, the industry's trending this way. I have cared about them since I was a racer. I have been watching closely. We've hosted events, et cetera, 10, 12, 14 years ago, talking about the future of how to power vehicles. So it's very much part of our DNA to develop the Electrified program. So what is the Electrified program? Well, first of all, our entire field is focused, like really, really goal focused, and each component of the rally is built intentionally, from our course, the competition, the format, the experience, and the takeaways that we hope people to get from the involvement. It falls underneath what we call Rebelle Impact initiatives, and you can check that out on our website. Rebelle Impact are the things that we do beyond just the competition. It's including their women's initiatives, but it's also the conservation and care and concern for our environment. Rebelle Impact is where we put time and resources to components of the rally that we fundamentally believe are extremely important and keep us, clear focused on giving back. The program is the Electrified program is divided into two components. One are solar powered base camps, trying to reduce the footprint of our base camps. That's actually a picture of the setup that we had at this year that Bob will go through. And then also, it's obviously the electrified vehicles and the remote, and my body's probably in the way, the remote powering, rapid power that we supply on course. So let's see. And Noelle, hopefully everybody can bypass the lobby as they're trying to get in. I'm getting a lot of notifications.
Yeah, I'm admitting everyone as they're coming in, and I tried to bypass it, but meeting settings were already in place. So sorry, presenters.
Thank you, guys. Okay, here's a great picture at night of that remote rapid power on course, and actually a picture from our first year. So basically, we launched the program by design. A lot of people think that we launched the program because someone wanted to enter their vehicle. Rivian wanted to enter the R1T, so we started it. We actually started it by design and then started reaching out to the manufacturers. And I want people to understand too that the Electrified designation is not a class. So the vehicles, the electrified vehicles, PHEVs, EVs, they aren't their own class. They're competing head to head in either the 4x4 or the X-Cross class, because we did not want electric vehicles, electrified vehicles, to be seen as an oddity, that they needed their own class, or maybe they had a shorter course because of range anxiety. We did not want to do that. It was very important that they could compete head to head with their counterparts, with their ICEs. So we started small. So the first year, the program was the Rivian R1T in the 4x4 class and the Mitsubishi Outlander PHEV in the X-Cross class. And then, we wanted to start small, do it right, and then make it scalable. So scalability was very important to us. Here are the two cars from 2020. And then in 2021, we had 7 vehicles. So we went from 2 to 7. We had the Rivian R1T, the Volkswagen ID4, 3 Jeep Wrangler 4xEs, and 2 Kia Sorento PHEVs. And here's what I think is great. So basically the results. The noteworthy results are 2020, the Mitsubishi got second place in the X-Cross class, so they're on the podium, and the Rivian placed sixth place in the 4x4 class, big class of vehicles. And in 2021, the Jeep 4xe won first place and second place. Here's a picture of the 4xe in the dunes that received second place. The Rivian got fifth place in 4x4, and Kia got in the Sorento PHEVs, got second and third place in X-Cross. Here's a shot of the winning vehicle. So just a really great. And people got really excited to see them just, it was just expected almost that, they would do well. And some of the things that we really learned is that there is no question these vehicles perform so well. And if you have not driven an electric vehicle in the outdoors or in sand dunes, I've been fortunate to be able to test a lot of vehicles. When you drive a vehicle in sand dunes and you can hear the sand blowing off the tires instead of hearing engine noise, as a person who loves the outdoors, there is nothing like it. And so that was really exciting for us. But the big dilemma was not like, can these vehicles do it? Because I think that's what everybody was thinking about at first. There's no question they could do it. It was, how are we going to charge them? We are in the middle of nowhere. Sometimes the closest city to our first base camp this year that had power was 3.5 hours away. So we had to create systems that could power not only in base camp, we have 4 base camps and we had 1 marathon stage. So we had to have power at the base camps at night, and then we also had to have remote power on course. And so the way I did it, it started, like, the history of it is a lot of sleepless nights, like a substantial amount of sleepless nights. And I can see Christopher over there smiling because he knows what that was like. We had some dilemmas as well. We had to prove ourselves to the manufacturers. Of course, everybody wants to come in and say, hey, we want to do an electric program, enter your car. We couldn't do that because we also couldn't have these vehicles fail. Not the vehicle, but we had to be able to power them. We moved quickly down that course. So the process that we went through was really good at helping us really kind of troubleshoot and get to the point where we are now. So step 1, and technically it should have been step 2, we had to vet the field of remote power suppliers. And these were many companies. I believe we really vetted about 8 companies that looked like they may have had a solution. A lot of them tended to be startups. And I think some people on this call are on this call because they want to do some things like we're doing. They want to solve some problems they haven't been able to solve in just like what we've gone through. And what we found is there were a lot of startups, a lot of well-meaning people, a lot of people with investment money. They have this one solution or a van filled with batteries. What we heard was a lot of like, this will work in theory. We have this thing that should be ready by the time the rally is ready. But what we found is they had usually one solution. They were betting the farm on that one solution, and it really made us feel uncomfortable. We also needed to be able to say, we didn't have people that looked at the problem and said, okay, we can do this, but then we can scale it in the future so you can accommodate a lot of cars. At the same time, simultaneously, we were contacting the manufacturers and reaching out about the program. What we found is that we had started talking to Rivian actually in 2019, but vehicles weren't really ready yet to be out on course, and neither were the remote charging solutions. So enter in 3 companies. One was Mitsubishi, who said, absolutely, they had been involved in the rally. No problem. We want to make our vehicle shine on that rally. The other one was Rivian. We had already been talking to them. They had been very interested. They were excited. They seemed like they would be a great partner for this. And then also Audi. For everyone who knows me, knows I'm an Audi fan. My first car was an Audi. I've owned 6 Audis. And I knew that the e-tron was a proven vehicle, and as a stock manufacturer vehicle could do this. So I reached out to them and enter in Christopher Michelbacher, who's on the call. And Chris, can you raise your hand so people who are new to the call can see you? Thank you. And what Chris did, which was great, is he was able to help educate me because I had to learn a lot as well. And so we had to start making a plan to understand the exact power needs that we were going to need on the course. We also had to plan where we were going to power the vehicles, how we were going to power the vehicles. And Chris introduced me to Bob Mount, at the time Power Innovations, now Renewable Innovations. And he just said, Emily, this problem, you need Bob Mount. You need someone who's going to really think about the solutions that you need. And I want to show you one thing that we had to do. I had to start and shift my thinking. I had to shift my thinking to thinking about power consumption and electricity and how vehicles consume their batteries on course, and not just, you know, what may be advertised, but what it's going to be like out there on that terrain. And so I'm going to show you actually confidential planning grids, because I couldn't tell the manufacturers where the course is. Our course is confidential. So they had to have trust in me. They couldn't go run that course. They had to have trust in our organization that we had planned this out and that their car would succeed. Not the car, but that it could be powered to get to the course. We knew the car would succeed. So here is an estimate. You can see our days, the distances, and then the estimated kilowatt hour consumption of the battery, and then the mobile on-course fueling of this one. Then I had to break down each day of the rally, 8 stages of the rally, 2,500 kilometers of course, and break it down by, gosh, you know, every piece of data that we really needed. The description of the course, the type of terrain. You know, I thought about elevation gain, descents, and then I had to, for every little course section, whether it was smooth, whether it was pavement, whether it was loose dirt, sand, you know, double track, rocky terrain, and I had to assign a value, a kilowatt hour consumption value per mile, and basically have a calculation. And so I'm going to get out of the way. Hopefully everybody can see that. So you could see that we had to guess how much power it was going to take. Not power it was going to take, but how much battery consumption it was going to take. And then plan where was that truck going to meet those cars on course. The other thing that we had to do is we had to make it fair to the petrol vehicles, the internal combustion engine vehicles that were also competing, because we couldn't give the EVs an unfair advantage that they had that much more power. So we had to really work like, how is this going to be a legitimate competition that is fair for everybody competing? You can see this grid right here. This is actually, you know, where they're going, you know, the locations where they're going to be. This is, I can tell you that for each rally, I have about 30 pages of grids for planning. And then we have to pre-run the course multiple times to make sure that this is going to work. And then we have to permit the remote locations. And then we have to have backup plans. So hopefully you guys can see that this wasn't like, hey, let's enter an electric vehicle, you know, out there. And I have to thank Chris and the engineers also at Rivian for looking over these and then trusting us, not actually asking us and diving into where, you know, where's the course? Come on, you got to tell us, because we have to do that. We couldn't do that according to our rules. Here's a great sunset image of base camp and the impound area at night. So, so basically, the you know, critical thing is to turn this over to Bob because he is the absolute expert. So renewable innovations, who is renewable innovations? There is a link in the chat box to renewable innovations and to Bob. I think the most important thing to know about him, I'd like for you to read. It would take me 10 minutes to read his bio. He's, got such incredible credentials. He's been in the industry for a long time, and he is an expert at remote scalable power, but also that's green power. And so I am, the thing that I love about Bob too is that he doesn't think just about like, okay, we can do this. He thinks about all the things that can go wrong. And that is what we needed. We need someone who could think that way. And so, Bob, I am going to turn it over to you and want people to learn about renewable innovations. And you are muted, Bob.
Okay, we took care of that problem.
All right.
So, as we talked about this presentation, the first point that Emily brought up is why. Why did we undertake this? She mentioned that Chris and I had multiple conversations about being able to remotely charge vehicles. In that case, it was for Audi, but he then came back and said, hey, I want to introduce you to the Rebelle Rally. Would you be willing? And thought about that and tried to digest exactly what that entailed. And Emily went over a lot of that. But a couple of the points here, to the scale for us, it had never been done before. So as the old statement, we were going boldly where no one has gone before. We were involved and we are involved in what we call critical and rugged. A lot of the times it's for military applications, and this is a true test of rugged. As Emily said, you're in the desert. And there is nothing nice about being in the desert. Maybe others disagree, but it is a challenge for equipment as well as people. And of course, you can't go plug into a little receptacle in the middle of the desert. But the other point that I bring up is I was crazy. So a little bit about the why. We get a lot of discussion about green and how to be truly green. And I really don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but Emily pointed out what we call the solar MEC. With the solar MEC right there, it is a truly green system because we're basically capturing a lot of sun, storing it in batteries, and then using that power to charge the vehicles and to also run the base camp. And I want to talk a little bit about base camp because when you're talking about hundreds of people in the middle of nowhere, what do you need power for? You need it for lighting, both external to the camp and internal to the camp. You need it for media. You got to communicate with the world. You need it for water. You got to pump water. Yeah, you need it for heating. You need it for food preparation. Lots of needs for power. And again, here's a camp that moves in some cases daily. But we wanted to be able to power the camp totally green. Now we talk about lessons learned. When we first did the camp, the big lessons learned was more power. People think and plan for what is calculated, and it's always more. So whenever we do these, is we have to have a plan A, B, C, D, and E, because something will go wrong. And as Emily said, you can't shut off the power because that basically takes the race down. When we talk about hydrogen, there's a lot of discussion about green. And in order to be totally green, you have to generate the hydrogen through a renewable, transport the hydrogen through renewable means of transport, and then the application has got to be using your fuel cells to be green. And in this particular scenario, we're not claiming that it was 100% green, but in all the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to make sure that we reduce carbon footprint and we're as green as possible. So we want to talk a little bit about the infrastructure. And I don't want to go too much into detail, but we talked about this MEC, and MEC stands for Mobile Energy Command, and the S is solar. But and the other one is Mobile Energy Command Hydrogen Rapid Charge. But if you look at this, you'll see where you've got these smart flowers that basically open in the morning and close at night, and they track the sun from sunrise to sundown. And then you've got panels, and those panels, of course, are also absorbing the sun. All of that stores into batteries, which goes into inverter systems, which goes to power reels. These power reels have 200-foot extension cables on them, which go into what we call spider boxes. And those spider boxes break out into multiple outlets to power all of those multiple applications. When it's time to leave, you have to basically suck all that cable back up into the container, put all the spider boxes away, and you can travel. If you look at the other side there, a little more complex. Now, again, what we want to do is address the MEC-S and the MEC-H2, and they're totally different power capabilities, and we'll go into that on the next slide. But what we're trying to show you here is in here we have hydrogen fuel cells, we have batteries, we have inverters, and then we have rapid chargers. So basically the inverters are always running off the batteries, and the batteries run the chargers, and the design of the fuel cells is to make sure that the batteries are happy and charged. So as we said, we'll go into a little bit more about the detail here. So on the MEC Solar, if you can see here, 50 kilowatts of power, 220 kilowatt hours of battery, and there is an aspect for emergency charging on there in case you don't have enough sun. And we talked about the 4 made power reels. Now we wanted to give a feel for that. So basically it was the equivalent of powering 8 standard homes, and we were able to charge 4 battery electric hybrids. So it gives you a little bit about the capacity of what that vehicle did. Now, when we're going to the MEC hydrogen rapid charge, you can see here, we're now talking about 80 homes. And what we want everyone to understand is that when you're taking a vehicle and trying to charge it quickly, you have a couple of issues. You've got the ability of the charger to charge rapidly. You have the availability of the magnitude of power that you need, because again, we want to be able to charge these things quickly so that we don't have days or hours to charge them. We have minutes. And so we try and charge those. Our target is always to be able to charge in a 20-30 minute time frame on a large battery. But you'll see here, 250 kilowatt of hydrogen power, 500 kilowatts of inverter, a half a megawatt, 700 kilowatt hours of battery, and dual 180 kilowatt hour DC fast chargers. So hopefully that helps everyone get a feel a little bit about the magic that's inside that vehicle that rolls around on the desert to be able to charge these vehicles as they roll up. We're always worried that, as we do this, what if something goes wrong? Because if we're not able to charge those vehicles, those people who have invested so much, the drivers, the manufacturers, they don't have a race anymore. So it is really critical that everything goes smoothly and there are multiple plans. And so hopefully we've introduced a little bit about what's involved to basically power something like this in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, and Bob, one point I think that everyone should know is that you developed this system after the first year of learning. we had a long-term vision to learn. They knew that, they're the power experts. And so they came in the first year. And one thing I want to kind of say that's extremely important, it's not just about the infrastructure, it's also the people. To pull this off, you have to have the right people. They have to be experts. They have to be solution-minded. And what they did is they went back after the first year of learning, and they purpose-built this infrastructure for the Rebelle Rally. Granted, it can be used very well in other events, other applications, but this was developed for us. And Bob, how long did it take to build this infrastructure?
So we basically, to build this equipment, we had a little less than a year to pull all of that together. The biggest challenge, of course, that we're all involved with is supply chain. Being able to get this equipment and pull it from all over, not only domestically, but sometimes globally. And you're talking about a price tag for equipment like this in a special build up to $4 million. And so it's not cheap to be able to do this.
All right, Bob, thank you so much. Bob's going to speak in a bit about infrastructure. I'm going to turn it over to Lilly Macaruso from Rivian. And Lilly, I'd like for you to take about 2 minutes. Of course, it's I talked too long at the start. So Lilly, give us 2 minutes about you guys getting involved. And another thing that I would like to say is that the Rivian, year one, they were running a 135 kilowatt hour battery pack both years, but the vehicle that we had this year on the rally was optimized. It's what the consumers purchase. And what was great is they really didn't have to charge. They didn't have any range anxiety. That vehicle really tackled the course. They would take power when they could, because why not? It's kind of like not passing a gas station in remote places. But yeah, the vehicle performed great in that regard. So Lilly, take it away.
Thank you for that introduction, Emily. My name is Lilly. I work with Rivian, and like she said, we had wonderful competitors, Emmy Hall and Rebecca Donahue. And we started with the Rebelle due to Emmy Hall reaching out. So she wrote a letter which sparked our head of communications, and this became the catalyst of our attendance at the Rebelle, obviously with much further discussions with Emily herself. So one of the main reasons, and one of the reasons why, is whenever you look at one of our trucks, you see 1,000 decisions of what brought it to what you see now. And one of the reasons we wanted to be a part of the Rebelle is Emily and the whole team spends thousands of decisions on what you've heard already: charging, infrastructure, how do we move forward, and then how do we move forward responsibly. This obviously is a very grand adventure to attend the Rebelle Rally. Luckily, we're based in adventure the same way that Rebelles use a compass heading and distance to help guide them. So while attending, we did further our innovation, both technical and for our attending personnel. So on the technical side, we further adapted and added different user experiences and features. And then we also strengthened and then took back a lot of those learnings to various teams. A lot of our team actually spread across the whole company. So it wasn't just one engineer learning one thing to one team. We had a very diverse team. You can actually see Nicole Johnson and Roe there. So they actually got to be in the mechanics pit, and they always looked that dirty and cold. So luckily there are showers on the Rebelle, so that helped. We didn't just take back data, we took back a couple of smells. But through this, we adapted our charging and remote locations. We adapted to make sure that while you're in the vehicle or external, what were those findings? So we strengthened the team. We brought back more findings. And then lastly, we definitely partnered so that way we can test in a responsible manner. So this extended proving ground is one of the ways that Emily provides responsibility. And you're not just blowing through the desert, you are on permitted land, you are definitely helping keep the public lands open and educating other people about how to do it responsibly. So it's not just building our team or the technical findings, it was being able to build all of those and do it on a responsible platform. So that was our findings from the Rebelle.
All right, thanks, Lily. And now I'm going to turn it over to Mark from Volkswagen. I'd love for you to talk to us about why you joined the Rebelle.
Yeah, good to be here. And I guess a few salient points here. I mean, one of the things that we want to do with our electric vehicles is show that off-roading and motorsports is not going to die when we go to an electric future. So, we want to show that the future is bright for these vehicles. Obviously, we're getting in there very, very early. We saw it as a very good opportunity to showcase the range, the durability, and the performance of the ID.4 in pretty extreme circumstances. Obviously, we were the first fully electric SUV to complete the rally. We saw it as a great opportunity to support women in motorsports. I think that's very important. Diversity is a big part of all big corporations these days, and I think you're seeing more and more women getting involved in motorsports, which is great. And the other thing we did, this was our second off-road event in North America with ID.4 during the launch year. We'd entered the NORA 1000 earlier on with Tanner Faust, and we got to the end of that one. We had challenges with that one, particularly because we went in with rear-wheel drive, and obviously Mercedes and Emily had the benefit of all-wheel drive by the time we did Rebelle. I think one of the key learnings we found before I turn over to Dustin to talk about the broader aspect of EVs within the company is you need to test. I mean, we with EV, you really do actually have some kind of range anxiety if you don't go and test a vehicle which is operating in extreme circumstances, and those extreme circumstances draw more out the vehicle than you would if you're just driving down a highway. So I think the key learning definitely from our perspective was that Emily and Mercedes did great. We think they'd have done even better if we'd managed to do a little bit more testing beforehand, just because that's the one thing I think you have to differentiate between EVs and gas powered cars. ICEs been around forever. EVs, they were around at the dawn of motoring. They were the first cars to go 60 miles an hour or a mile a minute, and then they disappeared for about 80 years. So we're learning all the things that ICE competitors learned in the interim. So with that, I'll hand over.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And I think that's really important for everybody is getting experience. And I think it was Mercedes Lilienthal, who's a journalist, an automotive journalist. She was the driver of that vehicle. What a great opportunity to really, as a journalist, get to live in an electric vehicle, get to understand it. It's with everyone. We have a lot of engineering programs that are entered into the Rebelle Rally, and the whole purpose is so those engineers can literally live in that car for 8 days, learn the things that they like and don't like, troubleshoot, etc. So thank you, Mark. And now, let's see, Dustin.
Yeah, I'm up next here. All right, so
just real quick, if people are watching and you have questions, go ahead and put your questions in the chat box. And Dustin, let's talk about the state of EV.
I think it's an exciting time specifically to be involved in electrification. I've been involved in it for about 15 years now. So, this is a great thing to see for me, this evolution that's happened with electric vehicles. When I started in EVs, we couldn't get anyone to really care about them at all. And I've done many long treks in different EVs through the years. And I remember having to stop at KOA campgrounds to get across the country, and it would take weeks. Now you could do it with fast charging. You could see what you could do it with new technology and how you're even taking this in places that, really when we were starting this in the 2000s, it was hard to see this out in the future, how this would be there. So it's really amazing to see in really such a short time frame how electric vehicles have really captured the imagination of the public, of people looking to, to get into this technology, have it in their own homes, and then how we're actually really taking it to the limits with something like this. So, really just fantastic to see and to have been a part of this kind of from birth to where we are now. And we still have a long way to go because, as Mark said, we're still early movers in this. In terms of the overall amount of electric vehicle sales last year, VW had a lot, but you see here that in America there was only about 400 some thousand sales. You see where that ranks in the pecking order of brands that have them. Tesla currently is the #1 seller of electric vehicles in the USA, followed by Volkswagen Group. So we're happy to be in that second place category. But when you see how far we are from the next competitor, I think we've got a long way to go. Now, when you take this to a global scale, you see that we're actually a lot closer together. The Volkswagen Group sold somewhere around the order of about 700,000 electric vehicles last year, whereas Tesla was just around 1 million. So we're a lot closer when it comes to that. But we're really committed to this in a big way. And, really the different brands that we have are huge. So as we get into here, this is just Volkswagen brand, but if we're even to take this out larger to the Volkswagen Group, which includes Audi, which includes Porsche and others, there'd even be more products here. But what you see here is some of the vehicles that we have out on the road today, and then kind of to the left of the screen, the ones that are going to be coming out later. One that I think a lot of people are interested in is that new VW bus. It sort of is a product that doesn't exist on the marketplace today, kind of like what we've seen Rivian do. Rivian brought out the first electric pickup truck to get to a consumer. I think we'll look to reinvent the bus and bring that back to a consumer and really bring an entire family into electric car with a ton of space, ton of usability, and harnessing really what makes an electric vehicle very special. But you see that's a collection of products that we have out in the market today are coming in the short term. And over the long term, look to be investing $100 billion into electrification. So in terms of overall investment, really just an impressive amount of capital being allocated towards this. And this is really the focus and the future of Volkswagen. What that means to Volkswagen in the USA, that means that we're actually going to be building these vehicles here in the US. And that's important because we're bringing jobs into the US market as well, and we're going to be building these vehicles homegrown. So ID4 built in the Chattanooga assembly plant that we have now, nearly $1 billion investment into that. And not only does that make an investment into Chattanooga and the United States and Tennessee, all of the suppliers and jobs that are created through that too is exactly what you want to see. And so in terms of total investment in that area, nearly $3 billion, 2,500 new jobs created just by this electric vehicle alone that we're going to come here. And this is only the first one. And then, in terms of being prepared for tooling and suppliers ready for more capital, more money being put into this country, into getting these jobs and this part of the economy really awoken in for our case in the southern part of America. So that's pretty great. All right, what's next?
Yeah, you know what? Actually, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So first of all, we have people that are immediately saying on the chat that they love the bus, and then they want to know when there will be an e-Amarok.
Well, the Amarok's an interesting one because we don't have the Amarok in the U.S. I think this trucks are something that I think we get interested in as we see our competitors like Rivian have a lot of success with the truck and really garner the imagination of their customers and build an entirely new segment. And as we're looking to really reinvent who we are, I think we look at those same things. So we're looking at all product categories. I think there's a few things that we've got to our advantage. We have a whole classic catalog of products like the bus that people love that we can reconsider to bring back as electric vehicles that probably couldn't ever be brought back any other way, just because of new crash restrictions and just the way that cars are built. What you can do with an electric vehicle architecture makes that very interesting. And then particularly get into areas that maybe we've never been. So it's a very exciting time to be involved in automotive. Mark said it best. Electric cars were here at the dawn of automotive, but the technology didn't work at that time. And it comes back 80 years later, and that really will be the dominant technology, because in every single way, even as you said earlier, you get behind the wheel of an electric car, it's an aha moment. It's like, I get it. This drives better. It's more fun. It's smooth. It's just easier to get into and go. And once you can get past the charging piece, which is really an easy thing to overcome, and something that we worked really hard in overcoming for really our mass market consumer, you can get huge levels of adoption. And that's where we're really committed to how do we bring this technology really into the hands of the most amount of people, make this very user-friendly, and get adoption to electric cars to a place where our entire portfolio of Volkswagen can be electric.
Yeah, and we had talked prior to this meeting about the innovation curve, for you to talk about the innovation curve. And really, I almost should call it the investment curve.
Yeah.
Because when, I think for people watching, when you see $100 billion being invested by Volkswagen, then multiply that, everybody, all the manufacturers are working toward electrification. They all have the same problems to solve. We already know that an electrified vehicle, boy, the on-demand power that you have when you squeeze that throttle is awesome. But they have other, challenges. But it seems that, with the amount of investment you're making, it's being made across the board. I would assume would you call it the investment curve or the innovation curve, or a combination of both?
It's a combination of both, and it's getting people to believe that this technology is ready for prime time too, because I think there's still a lot of questions there from the kind of the ordinary consumer to say, am I ready to make this shift? Because to some, it seems like a big shift when it's really, the quality of life with electric car is much better than a gas car. But investment's huge, because to get to the kind of levels of volume that we would need to get to replace every ICE vehicle on the road, it's going to take a lot of capital to get the supply chain prepared for something like that. So that's what you're seeing. Huge amount of capital coming into this technology. I think we've gotten to a place where we're trying to drive down costs now. We've gotten to a pretty good place where we've got, vehicles with more than enough power. The fastest production vehicle on the planet right now is an electric car. More than enough range. We see electric cars now going over 500 miles of range. And more than enough just like product attribute that really makes it make sense for consumers. Now it's about driving down costs. And that's an important place for VW to come in. That's been our history in this business. How do we bring all those things together that people love about the freedom of having a car, and we open those things up for the mass market? And what ID4 has done is absolutely done that. And to be a car that is around the same price of any other car in its class, to have better attributes in every way, and then something that was important for us to include the charging package with the car to make that so it's not a stumbling block for consumers, has been an important recipe for adoption. And that's completely our focus. How do we get people to really understand the technology, bring it within the reach of as many people as possible in terms of a price point? And then on the back of that, once we can create that demand, our investments have to be in the right place so we can fulfill it. And I think we're doing a good job of that right now. We're getting production put into this country. We got production throughout the world too, in Europe and in Asia. And we are more prepared than I think any other manufacturer in the world. And I think that's proven based on the results that we've already seen of nearly 1 million sales already, to be ready for the consumer tipping point for electric cars. And we really want to lead that tipping point.
Well, and I think what's exciting, and for those of you who don't subscribe to this, I subscribe to Bloomberg Hyperdrive, and every morning in my inbox I get information about what's happening in electric vehicles, especially in the investment. And one of the most exciting things I see is that it's happening right here in America. Plants, development in plants, the workforce, et cetera. And I think that's super exciting. For everyone who joined late, Dustin is the director of eMobility for Volkswagen North America. If you have questions, put them into the chat box. Dustin, thank you. I'm probably going to come back and ask a question. I think you answered one of our myth-busting questions. People are like electric cars cost too much. So obviously, those are going to come down, and we're already seeing some of those announcements happen. We've seen it obviously with the ID4. So I'm going to turn it over to a real question that a lot of people have, which is about batteries. So Christopher, thank you for being on, and also just thank you Volkswagen, thank you Rivian, Mitsubishi, Jeep, and Kia for believing in the Rebelle program and not being afraid to jump in and dive in with both feet. And Christopher is EV infrastructure for Audi, and I believe you used to be with the Department of Energy, if that's correct, Christopher. And obviously, like my Yoda when it came to the start of this journey. So let's dive into batteries. I think that's really important. So I want you to educate us about them.
Excellent. Yeah, actually, we could just advance to the next slide so we can really dive in. As the previous slide was really kind of focusing on the commitment to, yes, we're committed to electrification, but we're also committed to kind of the total life cycle, you could say cradle to grave of the vehicle. So we do align with the Paris Climate Agreement, 2020-50 carbon neutrality. And so we're marching towards that. And so that previous slide was really sort of speaking towards that. So it's not just the actual product that you consume, but also sort of that total life cycle. And if we want, we can get into that a little bit more if you care. But yeah, when we're really looking at battery technology, like Dustin, I have been doing this for probably longer than most. Think about 13, 14 years now. I cut my teeth in Department of Energy, first principles sciences for lithium-ion battery research. And so, out of pretty much anything, that's probably come the longest and come the furthest. So we were looking at, back in 2008, maybe $1,000 per kilowatt hour for a battery that was not very energy dense. And so now we've probably tripled the energy density, and we have maybe cut the cost of that same kilowatt hour down to around $100 a kilowatt hour, and that's at the cell level. And so as we sort of walk into let's look at the different components of a battery, and this is really what we're seeing as the modern EV battery. And a lot of development and innovation has taken place in this space as we learn more about what makes a lithium-ion battery happy and how does it perform. So you're going to find your typical modern EV to be between 400 and 800 volts. We can get into the 800 volt technology in a moment. But these high voltage batteries, they're comprised of cells, which are then kind of assembled into modules. And those cells are either placed in a series or parallel configuration. And series gives you higher voltage, parallel gives you more power or more current. And so to meet the performance needs of your battery, you'd configure your cells in a certain configuration. Then those modules so all those different cells inside those modules are then placed into a pack, and again, series and parallel configurations in order to kind of meet that attribute that the car is supposed to achieve, whether that's peak performance from a power delivery or it's a more efficient and that's where you're looking at maybe a higher. So, and then of course, cooling. Cooling is probably one of the most important aspects of the modern battery. That is very, very important from the overall performance of the vehicle that it could achieve. So that's charging and discharging. So driving performance, acceleration. And I think we probably saw with early EVs in probably the early 2010s that were passively cooled, that resulted in some challenges. So the modern EV, the modern battery, is going to have an active cooling system. And that's pretty much here to stay. How that architecture is configured and the way the batteries are totally packaged, that's going to be up to each manufacturer and attributed to the performance attributes they're looking to get from that specific car. So switching gears a little bit here to talk more about sort of where do we see these trends headed. This is where I have my former DOE hats on and looking at those projections and speaking freely about them. But I've got the e-tron GT up on the screen here. This with its sister car, the Porsche Taycan. These were the very first production vehicles to deploy an 800 volt architecture. And what's really important about going to 800 volts is the ability to reduce the amount of current or the amount of amperage in order to achieve a certain power performance level. So when you're reducing the current in an overall system, you can actually reduce the wire size. You can reduce the overall heat rejection or the cooling system, the size of that. So cooling systems for batteries consume a lot of power because we need to keep these batteries very happy. Otherwise, we have degradation. And so when you have a higher voltage battery, you can then think about, okay, well, what do I want to do with this newfound efficiency? And so you can optimize your thermal management system. So you could maybe make it a less powerful thermal management system in order to improve the range. So less consumption and energy in that space. Or you could use it to hyper cool your battery to maximize that like straight line acceleration. Or if you look sort of at this bottom curve, the charging performance. And so what we're kind of looking at here when we look at charging performance, it's really all about 80% state of charge. There, you kind of, after that, you run into some physics, which we likely will never really overcome, if I'm perfectly honest. But we're trying to maximize, it's that this section here where it's nice and flat to the left of this curve. It's really nice. It's a nice tabletop. We want to maximize the amount of time we spend in that location because that's going to ultimately result in that miles of range added per minute. So we're starting to see times, miles of 20 miles and up per minute, which is pretty substantial. So in a 10-minute time period, that's 200 miles, and that's really some like it's a pretty huge step in technology. So if we kind of now shift, how do we start to charge a car at that speed? We have to start to look at the infrastructure. And this is, I think, where we're starting to, I guess, we're seeing first sort of iterations of this technology. And so it's really that advent of 900 volts, again, to accommodate that future 800 volts plus technology. And you're seeing super high amps, so kilowatt outputs of 350 kilowatt or more. To put that into perspective, I think Bob did a really good job of showing that. It's, we're talking, gosh, 50, 60 houses worth of load in one charge port. And so that's a pretty significant amount of energy flowing into a battery in order to meet these times. I think the next component that we're going to run into when it comes to public charging, or at least the ability for you to charge your vehicle in space, is finding the charger, being able to execute the session, and being able to do all of that without having to be a subscriber to someone's network, be a subscriber to someone's app, downloading and creating accounts, and all being able to transact more freely and openly with the infrastructure, the same way that you do with traditional, petroleum fueling stations. And even technology that's happening or that is actually in market and coming to other brands and other vehicles is plug and charge. And so that can take us, that's an evolution beyond the internal combustion engine refueling paradigm, where instead of walking up, putting in the nozzle, putting in your credit card, and then starting the transaction, you just walk up, you plug in your car, and you leave. The car handles the payment, the car authorizes everything all in one seamless step. So we're starting to kind of see that convenience evolution with, the EV being sort of that diving board, that platform that kind of allows this innovation.
You know what? That's great that you bring that up, because I think that's any of us who have tried to charge, we've all experienced that. Oh, do I have the app? Does this have enough charge? So, I think that's really important. That's great that you bring that up. Obviously, innovation and investment and common goals are really speeding that. But that's, I think, really exciting. I have one question is that we just got is, the industry going to get to a common charger? There are proprietary charging systems. Will that get to a common place?
That's funny. That's probably, in my opinion, one of the biggest failings of EVs. So again, I've been doing this for a long time, but there's in the United States, there are currently 3. So there's Tesla's, which is proprietary, and that's probably a longer story. Dustin can probably wade into that if he really wanted to. Then you have the CCS connector, which is what most of the industry has gravitated towards. So that's the kind of open standard here. And then you have the CHAdeMO that was traditionally used by the Japanese and maybe some of the South Korean manufacturers. I say, fortunately, the CHAdeMO connector is waning from favor, so we're down to 2. And I think what we're going to see, it's really probably going to be driven by policy and whether there's that drive for open networks in order to leverage public dollars. So right now we have 2. I'm hoping we would be able to get down to 1 eventually. They both are pretty viable for the amount of power that needs to be delivered to the vehicles. But time will tell.
Yeah. Dustin, do you have any comment on that?
No, other than, globally, we've seen standardization really work, right? Whether it goes to the CCS connector type, or in China, they have their own connector type. These problems exist in other parts of the world too, but they seem to have solved them a little quicker than we have, where there isn't as much trouble with this. But yeah, we'll see how it goes over the long term. I think, you saw the advantage of Tesla being the first mover and why they'd want to use that, have somebody in a walled garden a bit with their charging. So once you get a Tesla, like, oh, this cable only works with a Tesla, I just have to keep getting a Tesla. It's sort of like more of an Apple type approach. We'll see what but the difference is that this is going to have to deal with public infrastructure. So we'll see what happens over the long term, and how that's dealt with. But right now, it's going okay, I'd say.
Yes, and actually, policy. That is something we wanted to include in that this conversation today, but we only had 90 minutes. We'll probably go over it just a little bit on Q&A. We're trying to incorporate the questions now. But if you are interested in us hosting a more policy update on policy, I would love to have you just put in the chat box that you would like us to host a session on policy, where policy is and where it's going. So I'm going to dive into helping people understand average charge times, and I'm going to open this up to Bob, and then I also want Chris on this. So Bob, if you can lead this slide right here, Chris, feel free to jump in. And I love it. They're friends. And one thing I want to bring up is we're all out there talking about this. We all have the same goals. We want electrification. We want to be as green as possible. Some people, unfortunately, are a little unrealistic and want us to be perfectly green right now. And we're in that transition phase. So I think today's call is good. We're in that transition phase. But sometimes, people have different ideas of how to get there. But the goal is the same. And so I love it. If we see a little back and forth, that's fine by me. But Bob, if you can take it over. And one thing I do want to say, it's easy for you to say, but I want people to hear it from me. We, and Mercedes Lilienthal on this can probably say it, we had more reliable rapid power on the Rebelle Rally that you can find in a lot of locations. It worked. So that was really awesome. And it happened quickly. We were getting great charges within in 35 minutes and under, rapid on the side of the road. So Bob, can you go over this slide and then the next slide for size, battery size?
So one of the things that we have to understand is that in business, everyone has different objectives. Hopefully everyone wants to be profitable, but how you get there and what you do. With an automotive manufacturer, of course, they're trying to promote electric vehicles, and infrastructure people are trying to put nozzles in the ground, but there's a lot of areas in between, and the public normally is the one that, as the public, we assume that everything's going to be great and wonderful, but there are different standards for the speed, I'm going to say, at which you can charge the vehicle. Now, if you look at that chart, what we try to do is just, it's going to vary per vehicle, but you have what we call a level 1 and a level 2, and I think everyone is very understanding of what that is. Now, the level 1 is when you plug it in your wall outlet, and of course that's going to take a longer time to do it. It's convenient because the availability for a wall outlet is everywhere, but it takes a lot of time. We didn't put that on the chart, but the level 2, which is what I think that most of the manufacturers are hoping that people have in their homes, will allow you to charge that a little bit quicker. So if you see in the chart, when you plug your car in, we're talking about that 11 plus hour on a level 2. Now we'll talk a little bit more about the ability of the vehicle to take a charge, in other words, the speed that the vehicle can take it, the ability of the charger to put it in the vehicle, and the availability of power for the charger. There are 3 things. So what we're doing here is go back to the other slide here. Back one. Oh, there, good. So when we talk about a DC fast charge, there's a lot of different fast chargers that are out there in the industry. And I think that most common you'll be between the 25, 30, and 50 kilowatt chargers. That has a lot to do with the availability of power at the place and the cost of the chargers. But you're looking there in that 5-6 hour time frame if you plug your vehicle in. And our goal with Renewable Innovations is what we call rapid charge. And as the automotive manufacturers are building the cars to take the power more rapidly, as Chris talked about, we want to make sure that the power is available to the charger, whether it's grid-based or in a lot of cases is not grid-based. But our goal is to be able to charge that vehicle in 20 minutes. Now, you're not going to go in there and put the nozzle in and within 5 minutes, like with a petrol vehicle, be full. But what we're trying to do is get as close to that as possible. So again, with rapid charge, our target is always going to be in that 20-minute time frame to charge your vehicle back up. So I guess we can go to the next slide. So this is what we're talking about right here is that, you know, when you're in that level 1 and level 2, you're putting the energy back into that battery at a very slow rate. So you can see in the chart right here, we're talking about the eyedropper as an analogy here. But then when you go to the fast charge, you know, now we're talking about the beaker, you know, where we're putting it in there a little bit more rapidly. And then we go up to the fast charge where we have your fire hose. But we want to point out there with that e-tron is that in that particular scenario there, it's got the ability to take it faster. But even with that ability, if I'm only giving it at that, you know, 30 or 50 kW, even though the car's got the ability, it's not going to charge it faster. So the whole intent here is to be able to increase the capacity of the vehicles. In other words, how much energy they can store, number one. Number two, to be able to put it into the battery quicker, and the manufacturers are working on that. But number three is to basically build the chargers so that they can put it in as quick as the car can take it, but have the availability at the location to the charger, as I said earlier, from the grid or from other resources that we're developing to have that capability. As we talked about, you know, when you go to your convenience store, they're normally looking at power to run pumps and refrigerators. They're not looking at powering 50 or 80, 100 homes. So there's tremendous infrastructure involved in being able to provide the power to those chargers. And of course, we're talking about doing it with green, with fuel cells, but it gives us the ability in a small footprint to generate megawatts of power in a green way. So hopefully this is helpful to understand, you know, the aspects of charging up that vehicle rapidly, what's involved in doing that. And as Emily pointed out, is our intent on that rally is for these vehicles to be able to charge those rapidly because they are on a rally. So maybe, Chris, if I said anything that you want to add to or change?
Sure. No, I mean, I think the point I would really make is that not all infrastructure is created equal. And so that's kind of what we're trying to illustrate here. And then, of course, not all vehicles are created equal. And that really kind of comes into sort of that technology S-curve that Emily was referring to earlier. And so all of that investment. And you know, just sort of an anecdote that I get this question all the time, like, okay, I've got my e-tron or my e-tron GT. I plugged into the 350 kilowatt charger, but I only got 270 kilowatts. What gives? And well, yeah, okay, I'm glad you're plugging into the higher power charger, but the car itself is now the limiting factor. So in many cases, you'll find the infrastructure being the limiting factor because the modern electric car has just got a lot of performance. It's kind of outgrown some of this infrastructure. But then you'll also find that the car is, and its battery technology perhaps is the limiting factor. And so now that we've got all these commitments that Dustin was referring to, and you know, hundreds of billions of dollars of investments from sort of the global OEMs, you're starting to kind of see this convergence of the infrastructure, the vehicles, and sort of that's being able to meet this sort of customer demand of range capability and of like the refueling parity. So internal combustion EV being able to refuel in a similar amount of time.
You know, that's really great. I mean, what I encourage everybody to do is before the first time you take an electric vehicle out or you rent one, et cetera, get to understand, do a little bit of research. That helps. You need to know what the car can accept and what the charger can do. So, yeah, so that's really important. And it doesn't take long. It just, there's a learning curve, but it's a quick learning curve. And there's nothing better than just putting yourself in that vehicle. I think what's challenging is that, the mind of the consumer, they'll hear something, they will latch on to a piece of information because they don't necessarily want to change. And so they might take a piece of information that's come out in the media and latch onto that and say, well, this is a problem or this is a problem. But people don't understand, people didn't want to probably change over from, horse and buggy either. So, this is definitely that interesting time, but it's happening really rapidly. And so what I want to do right now is talk about the public charging networks that exist. And then I want to keep this to probably about 5 minutes, go through it quickly. But also I want to talk about remote, because I think a lot of people are interested on this call of, they're not in every city. They know in cities, the chance that range anxiety isn't as much of a worry as it is out in the backcountry. So Chris, can you go through this slide?
Yeah, of course. And just one thing I wanted to kind of mention, your comment really kind of sparked this for me. And that's the people that are latching on to a specific reason to why not. And it is really just this technology is developing so quickly. Just when I talked about just the battery technology advancements, what was true maybe a year ago is probably no longer true today, just with all of the investment and all of the advancements that are really taking place. So important context there. And of course, I always say this, like the best cure to range anxiety is to own an EV. You'll find out that it's really not that big of a deal. Dustin can attest to this. And of course, this map that we're showing here can also kind of attest to that as well. So, today, this is courtesy of our friends, Electrify America. They're the largest fast charging network. But, as a proxy, you can kind of see just the build out that we're talking about here. So within the next 3 years, we'll be adding over 1,000 more individual locations and tripling the amount of actual infrastructure and number of ports available. And so that just becomes really important as, the customer thinks about, electric vehicle isn't right for me. I can't find public charging. And in fact, when you look at this map, for 99% of people's needs, in fact, there will be infrastructure. There's likely already infrastructure there for you, ready in the ground to support. And I'm only showing right here 150 kilowatts capable infrastructure or higher. So serious performance out of these chargers. And you're going to see this expand a lot more just with the infrastructure bill that has come through. And sort of that collaboration between the public and the private sector. I think what's going to be really interesting, though, as you mentioned, the sort of off-road community and a lot of the maybe attendees looking at that, these locations are probably here more to serve sort of the mass population who is looking to go from A to B on their daily commute, or maybe from here to grandma's house and less so into the woods. You have other manufacturers that are building bespoke networks into those locations. And I think this is also true of like where the renewable innovations technology can shine. So these pockets where you don't see a lot of charging infrastructure could be because there's not actually any charging. There's not actually enough grid in those locations. So there is a lack of that infrastructure. And so that's where these sort of mobile solutions can really kind of bridge that gap as we move toward it. I guess I would like to have Bob sort of trumpet about this a little bit more. But yeah, we're really seeing sort of this big investment and shift into all of these technologies and the build out. It's what a time to be alive in an EV.
Go ahead, Bob. Thank you, Chris.
So on the charging aspect right there on that slide, you see 3 solutions right there. 2 are mobile and 1, we call it stationary, but it's designed to be a drop and go. So for example, for an airport or a convenience store or a park, where that thing is dropped in place and it's independent of the grid and it can be able to charge vehicles. And of course, the plan is by green hydrogen, so it is a green charging solution. But as we talked about, we're talking about magnitudes of power. So we're talking about the megawatts of power that we're dropping and going and allowing us to build that infrastructure that way. And we'll talk a little bit more maybe about the infrastructure, but when you talk about infrastructure, it's not running an extension cord. I mean, you're talking about a lot of money to be able to bring that capability and magnitude of power to a location. If you look at the mobiles, a lot of you have seen the press release, but that went out a few days ago. But what we're trying to do is take it to the point where you've got a little trailer that you can basically tow with a half-ton pickup truck or an SUV and be able to do rapid charging, or to be able to run it as a generator at a venue or power food trucks. But the idea to bring that power, that magnitude of power that you need, when we talk about that incident on 95 a couple of weeks ago where all those people in the DC area were stranded. Well, you know, there's something where, I mean, you're sitting in your car for 18 hours. Well, you didn't plan on that. And to be able to bring that in and to be able to run a charge to those vehicles, that's a big deal right there. And then, of course, when we look at that, the MEC, which we use at the Rebelle Rally, that's where you're bringing in the heavyweights to be able to do an awful lot of charging and capability. But you can see, you've got a half a megawatt that's basically on wheels. So it is exciting with the things that we're doing and the solutions that we're coming up with.
I love this slide. You're doing a great project with California Department of Energy.
Yeah, so what California is trying to do is, when we talk about chargers that are down, when we talk about rolling blackouts, when we talk about a lot of these different issues, of course, California is leading in the green. And this is a 2-year program to basically take 4 of these systems all over California, because what they're trying to do is address a lot of different variety of challenges, whether it be location, whether it be season, the application itself. And so over a 2-year period, we're going to be doing a lot of testing of these systems throughout the state.
Yeah, and that's great. So, we've already gone through a couple of myth busting items. One with Dustin on cost of vehicles, because that's obviously one. Those costs are coming down, especially you can see it through the ID4. And then here's a perfect example. I live in Southern California. You have a heat wave. Fortunately, I'm on the coast. You have a heat wave. People turn on their air conditioners and you have rolling blackouts. So, it's great. So people who are concerned about this, this is no surprise to California Department of Energy. They know it. They know it's an issue, and they're addressing it. And what's great is they're addressing it, like Bob said. It's not something that's being plugged in by an extension cord. It's hydrogen. It's probably got backup systems, redundant systems, and they're addressing this already. And that's a program that's rolling out. So I think that the public can be kind of rest assured that these things they're looking for solutions. It's not like they read the news and then went, oh, that's a problem. So I'm going to switch to this. You can see this is Renewable Innovations, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 EV charge stations. Bob, is that you've got a lot of programs going on, but somebody just asked, are those mobile EV hydrogen-based solutions, are they available for events now?
So the MEC is available at this point. It is costly at this point to bring that out. And so what we want to do at this point for the bigger units is it depends on the event, but we do want to get it out into the public. We do want to go on the tour so that people can see the technology and see how things are changing. There was a statement that was made earlier a couple of times about thousands of decisions. And that's the exciting thing, is that when these things are being implemented, there's a lot of smart people with a lot of companies, and we're very fortunate to partner with a lot of them, but those thousands of decisions are multiplied. And again, there are great things that are coming down the pike and addressing a lot of these problems that we're all trying to face.
Yes, and for example, there was the announcement this last week for Renewable Innovations. That was actually a partnership with General Motors. And so I want to bring this up because that was actually put out there in that release. Can you explain that? And up in the corner, it says the typical EV charging costs. Can you and Chris or Dustin address this? It says 25 cents to 75 cents per kilowatt hour, just kind of address those costs. And just so you know, what we find is, I go out and test a lot of cars. And so you might use 2 to 2.5 kilowatt hours of battery per mile of highway, driving on flat pavement. Some more, some less, etc. So as you start to kind of convert, it's almost like instead of trying to translate, you just start instead of translating French, you start thinking in French. After a while, we can set the menu on your vehicle to kind of see that and start, thinking in this. But if you can address that cost.
Yeah, maybe I'll go first on this because I'm such an outspoken person on this topic, I think, throughout the Volkswagen group. And Chris knows this, and we talk about this a ton because this is actually a difficult problem to overcome with a customer. To start to, as your way, kind of what you were explaining there, like thinking in French, because you ask a person on the street what a kilowatt is, they have no idea. What is a kilowatt hour? How does it, they don't really have a good idea how they're currently paying for their energy, right? So when you try to extrapolate that, in what folks have thought about and thinking of paying per gallon of gasoline, they try to get that. Okay, it's around 40, 50 bucks. I know what I'm gonna have to pay. They don't have that idea in an electric car. Some think it's very little. Some people think it's a lot. Like my electric bill is going to go up like crazy when I buy an electric car. So there's a learning curve there. And in public charging is important too. So something that we found important is actually to kind of pay ahead. Some of that with fast charging for the VW customer. And we actually include 3 years of free charging with Electrify America. It's unlimited. So if somebody wants to drive across the country in an EV, it is absolutely going to be more enjoyable and much less expensive than it would be in a gas car. I even did a trip in an ID4 last year, and I drove from New York to Sacramento, about 8,000 miles. So we went the long way and not across the country directly, and it cost us nothing. And to really be able to convey that to a customer and what that journey was like, being able to get that free fuel is important. And I think we've seen other manufacturers kind of follow suit in that way too, to try to get over that stumbling block while we still have it, while we're really trying to perfect that. How do we get someone to understand a kilowatt? How do we get them to understand a kilowatt hour and those things?
So the other thing that I want to bring up is, infrastructure is costly, and people who are investing want to come up with ways to reduce the cost to the customer. Let's go back to the other one if we can. Reduce the cost to the customer. And so there's multiple ways to generate revenue. And with charging network, you've probably heard the statement that chargers are the new billboards. And so if you can see on the chargers, we're trying to go with big screens. And so the whole idea is that if you're taking in marketing dollars as you're charging, then you can customer less to charge. But it also opens up a lot of other opportunities to educate the person as they're charging. But, you talked about the change or the deviation, and a lot of that has to do with being competitive and also the cost of the power at the location, whether it be at an area where kilowatt hours are cheap or in a location where it's costly. But the whole idea here, I think, is to, with the development of the technology, to make the charging experience quicker, cheaper, greener, and more pleasant.
And
now if you-
profitable for the operator, I think, is important too, because it has to be a profitable enterprise. Otherwise, you'll never see a location like you see here, right? There has to be multiple different ways to potentially bring in revenue into this business. You said ad dollars. You've got, a cafe and snacks and things in there. And it's a kind of reimagining a place where someone is going to be longer than they're going to stay there longer than they fill up their tank with gas now. We make that an enjoyable experience that isn't a deterrent to someone moving to an EV.
Absolutely.
That's
So
great.
if you go to that next slide there. Oh, well, you were on that infrastructure, and we don't have to go there, but the reason for that is when we talk about infrastructure, again, I want to go back and make sure everyone understands that's not taking an extension cord. When we're talking about transferring megawatts from a substation or a place where it's available, and then taking it to where it needs to be, again, that's not an overnight project. I mean, there is a lot that's involved in that. So, that's why you talk about infrastructure bills and these other things, because again, it is re-engineering and rebuilding. So if you wanted to go back to that other one really quick. So what we're trying to do is talk about two things, and we're adamant about this, but we call it grid gap. But you have the availability of the grid and the capability of the grid. When we talk about capability, most of the time it's on a national grid, but capable can be also based upon a location. And then you have availability. And as we talked about earlier, rest area off the freeway in the middle of nowhere, maybe the grid is capable, but it's not available at that location or your national park. And then you have the other issue of people not wanting to disturb the natural environment by coming in here and putting the infrastructure in. And that's why being able to drop things in there like these pods and these national parks and things of this nature, A, allow you to do it rapidly, and two, not disturb Mother Nature or what they're coming for, the beauty of that area. But again, we just have to understand availability and capability, and a lot of that is location driven. And with the availability of powers we've already discussed, as Chris said, it's how much battery do you have in a car, and what is the ability of the car to take the power, what is the capability of the charger, and what is the power that's available to the charger. All of those come into play when we're talking about your time to charge, and then of course your efficiencies. And one of the things that we really don't want to go into, but one of the exciting things is a vehicle to grid. And basically that allows your vehicles now to even be a part of this infrastructure. And those are new technologies that are coming to play.
Yeah, in speaking to with Dustin, he started to bring up a few things that are on the horizon, that even can impact the Rebelle Rally. And you get really excited because we don't hear in those every day. And so what I think a few takeaways, and we've got a couple of questions. A few takeaways that I've learned through this. First of all, the biggest takeaway is the vehicles are just incredible, fun to drive. As a driver, I'm a driver, fun to drive. But really is that the change in efficiency, everything's getting more efficiency. It's just this race for efficiency. And I think that that's very exciting. So I think that we're all realists though. Everybody on this call, I think understands that it's not perfect. It could be a little bit with a lot of fun springing up. It could be a little bit like the Wild West for a little bit. I don't know if you guys would agree that could be a little bit of the Wild West, because there are different people trying to get funding. There are different people, groups trying to get their hands in it and be a part of it. And it's going to be a very interesting time. And Dustin, I see you kind of like shaking your head a little bit. Or
I just think Wild West is tough because you see how much money we're putting into this, right? And it's hard to get that kind of capital. Right now, the capital markets have been pretty open and very willing But I think if that were to dry up, you look at how will large companies that have been in this business and that can manufacture cars at scale be able to bring this to reality for consumers and really use their and do the right thing, right? Because I think you have to have a mission towards this, and very much I think the VW Group does, and you can see it in the results. But we need to get everyone involved in that same mission and be taking the consumer through this. And there's going to be winners and losers here, certainly, but it is exciting. And so maybe Wild West, but it's a really difficult game to get into, and it's one that it's full of landmines because it's a difficult business.
Yeah, somebody asked a question. Can anyone speak to the cradle to the grave life cycle of EV batteries?
Chris, you
can
want to
touch on this a little bit? So I think what we're seeing, like battery technology and its evolution and how energy densities have been increasing and just sort of and the costs have been coming down, we're seeing a lot of investment and research and progress through innovation in the recycling side of things. So what's I think beautiful about an electric vehicle is the ability for so much of it to be recycled and then be put back into the next generation of products. And so you're seeing even in Volkswagen Group's case, quite a bit of investment in this space. And it really comes down to the technology that you're using to recycle these materials and being able to extract as much of that critical material we would call. So that could be the lithium, primarily cobalt, and of course battery grade nickel. And being able to extract those materials and then minimize the amount of post-processing that needs to take place in order to put them back into a new system. And so there's a whole bunch of new technologies that are really coming out that are kind of limiting that post-processing. They're increasing the yields. And of course, that then limits the amount of mining that needs to be done for these new critical materials and these new, not just critical materials, but battery grade critical materials, which have to be incredibly high quality. And so you're going to see this total life cycle really start to converge on this closed loop system. Right now, there are plenty of reputable studies today that are showing cradle to grave total carbon emission, total footprint of an EV is actually less than an internal combustion engine. And it's only going to get more and more lopsided in favor of the EV. So again, that's, in my opinion, probably where the wild west is, because there is just so much innovation. And because the technologies are relatively new, you could see this juggernaut kind of burst out of nowhere. But again, there is a lot of money. There will be winners, there will be losers, and there are plenty of landmines to avoid. It is a very competitive business, but again, there's a lot of newcomers in the space.
Yeah, it's an interesting perspective too with recycling, because it takes a totally new idea of what mining could be. Rather than mining from the ground, you're really mining from old product that's sitting in people's drawers, right? And trying to find ways to incentivize people to give back these devices that are just sitting in their homes, and that those could potentially go and provide, material to create more battery packs rather than trying to find new mines in the ground. Something that right now we don't have a really great setup for in the United States. We don't really have the mining that are in other parts of the world that are providing these materials. They're in South America, they're in China, they're in other places. So it's also sort of like a national security concern, to really think about how do we bring this to a place where we can handle these things in the U.S. And the recycling is an interesting one, because maybe we can rethink that kind of mining idea in a whole new way. So I think it's very exciting. And as we get to a place where electric vehicles are being sold in mass, and there's those large battery packs coming back through recycling, that really can drive that material.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because on the myth busting side or misunderstanding side, there's so much concern about the mining of, precious, elements, etc. And I really like you addressing that. So thank you for that. We have a couple of more questions. Of all the policies and compliance standards leveled on the EV industry, what has been the most difficult to navigate? What has posed the most challenge?
Policy in terms of, I know one in terms of customer adoption is tough, is even some of the incentives that are already in place that really help someone purchase an electric car are not the most intuitive. And I think that's a common theme with electrification in general. So we've got policies in place that are very helpful, that would help people, get into an electric car at a lower cost. But I think there's distrust in those programs because there's like an instant rebate program. It's a part of your yearly tax return. It's a tax credit. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding on how that works. And I think, policy in that way could be shaped to better stoke the adoption of electric vehicles where it's not as, maybe as murky for most people because they don't understand maybe how their taxes work every year. And there's a distrust in that inherently.
And I'd add on that one is that one of the things is it favors wealthier people because, if you've got a big tax bill, you get the $7.5 grand tax credit. Whereas if you want to get an EV and you don't earn as much money, you might not be paying enough tax to get the credit. So that's one thing where it's a little bit inequitable.
Yeah. Hopefully that will change. Definitely we've had a lot of calls for yes on a policy discussion at some point in the future, which I think is important. Bob, we have a question. What is the difference between the MEC-H2 EV and the MEC-H2 RC portable stations?
So if we're talking about the trailer version, that is designed to be an 80 kW generator, but 180 kilowatt charger because there's 180 kilowatt hours of battery on it. So smaller as far as the amount of power it can generate and store, a little bit more versatile in transporting it, where when we talk about the MEC hydrogen unit or the rapid charge system, we're talking about a larger magnitude. We're talking about a half a megawatt of power and dual 180 to 200 kilowatt chargers. And of course, when we go to the actual convenience stores, it's kind of that MEC, but it's not on wheels. It's designed to drop it and go. So the short answer to that is power capability, hydrogen storage, and the number of chargers.
Great. I have it's going to be a little more technical or a lot of numbers here. How can Tesla, with an approximate 400 volt system, charge at 250 kilowatts? Could other 400 volt systems in the vehicles approach 300 kilowatts or 800 volt are a must at those charging speeds?
The question here is a good one. And there's a lot of marketing that goes into EVs as well, and particularly into the charge curve. The thing to think about with the Tesla supercharger is a fantastic network, and they've done a great job rolling it out, and it's a wonderful experience. I was involved in a lot of that. I worked at Tesla for many years. But with this is a particular thing where we talk about charge curves. So they could get peak performance at this sort of speed for a very short amount of time, and then it will come down. The advantage of an 800 volt is that you could sustain that much longer. Now, VW doesn't have 800 volts either. Now, VW Group does in some of our other products. But, I think it's important, the curve overall. So while you might say that there's this huge peak of charging, it's really what is your charge rate from, let's say, 5% to 80%, and how long does it take that to happen? That should be sort of the guiding principle for how you determine your speed. And there's a lot of things that go into that too, including temperature and other things. But yeah, I would say what you see often presented by Tesla is their peak speed that you may only be able to get in very certain scenarios. Anything to add to that, Chris?
No, you pretty well hit it right on the head. It is about sort of that peak, and regardless of how long you're able to sort of sustain it, I think the again, the 800-volt system will allow you to sustain that peak speed for just much longer. Just it all really honestly comes down to the amount of heat that you're generating in your battery and your ability to reject that heat.
Yeah.
And so 800-volt systems are much better with that because the current is much lower. And so basically, if you go from 400 to 800, you've basically cut the current in half to maintain the same amount of power. So I think that that's really why the gravitation towards the higher voltage packs is happening, because that ultimately gives you those performance attributes that you're looking for. You're now not looking at having those specific scenarios and having to meet every single one of those criteria in order to kind of maximize the area under that flat portion of the charge curve. So sustaining that high power for as long as possible. You may not need to have the optimum temperature. You may not need to be at that super low state of charge. You may not need to have your battery preconditioned all the time. So that's really kind of what you're looking at. That's really what the advantages are speaking toward.
Thank you. You know, we really have some great people on this call. We have guests answering other people's questions, and I know some of those guests. And one I wanted to bring up, because I think people are asking this, and it's good to ask this: is anyone working on EV conversion kits coming to the market for mass volume of existing vehicles? Aware of big hurdles, you know, and but it makes sense. You know, people don't necessarily want to just discard something, you know. But Dean Case, thank you. I'm from SAE. Answer the posted question: conversion kits for older internal combustion engine vehicles to electric is possible, but rather scary from a safety standpoint. High voltage is not for hobbyists. But anybody want to say anything about that?
Well, it sort of reminds me of Back to the Future 2, where they have hover conversion kits, if you remember the DeLorean hovering. But I think there probably will be a hobby for this. I think probably not for your more modern cars, but you know, something I think that excites VW, and something that we've actually had a prototype of is, you know, we took an old Type 2 bus and we electrified it, and we used more modern, we used the e-Golf, which was a previous generation product that we had, which is also fantastic little electric car, and we put those components into one of our classic vehicles. And you know, what's great about some of those classic cars, particularly you look at the Type 1 Beetle and the Type 2 bus, we made millions and millions and millions of those in a repeatable fashion, where you know what you've got. And so potentially, you know, there could be some sort of kit or other things, maybe you know, harnessed to be able to put into that car using some of our new technology, really breathing life into some of these these cars that have such an emotional connection to folks. I mean, everybody has a VW story around a Beetle or a bus or those cars. So if we can bring back life to those cars and make them more modern in some ways, and really make them better than they were originally, I think in probably about every way, that's pretty exciting. So while that's not a top priority for us, it's kind of a cool side project potentially. We did have a concept that we did, and I think that we got great reception to that. And you see Ford has done something similar with an old F-Series truck, and they put electric components in that. And I think we see there's a hobby building of this as well, where you can see classic vehicles put in with electric powertrains that make it far better than it ever could have been with, you know, even any of these kind of crate motors and other things. So it's an exciting time to be an enthusiast. It's an exciting time to be in the industry, and the sky's the limit.
Yeah, you know, if you look in the chat right now, there are a lot of people like, hey, this company's doing this, this company's doing that. You know, yeah, they're, you know, safety, all these things. So a lot of people are talking about it. So you can tell people are very interested in that. You know, I myself am too. So one thing, you know, we are now at, we had a feeling this would happen at about 1 hour and 50 minutes. I'm going to go, if that's okay, for just a few more minutes. And then I know some people will drop off, but one thing about myth busting or misunderstandings or concern that I wanted to address, because it happened to me. And Mark, I think you can answer that. We've had a good discussion about this, which is, basically lack of trust. Like if my vehicle breaks, something happens out there remotely, you know, I'm scared of that. I understand an engine and a transmission, and, you know, spent many years, you know, learning that. Can, you know, you address that? Because what we want to do is we want to break down some of those barriers to that reason to say no. Oops, you're muted, Mark.
Rookie error. Okay. Yeah, somebody who tinkers with old vehicles. You know, I've got a 1932 Austin 7 in the garage. It's got a distributor, it's got spark plugs, it's got all of that stuff. If it breaks down, it's an easy fix. I look under the hood of our cars nowadays. I can't even see the dipstick. I can't see the spark plug leads. If that thing goes south on me, it's going on a trailer. And one of the things I think people will have to realize about electric vehicles is that one of the great things about an electric motor is ultimately it's a much more reliable technology than an internal combustion engine. There's far fewer moving pieces. EVs power everything. Electric motors power everything around the world, and they're very, very reliable. And by and large, batteries too are very reliable. You're going to get electric vehicles crap out on you fully, yeah, sure, but again with cars, you sometimes get a conrod goes through the side of the block. So at the end of the day, anybody who thinks they're a shade tree mechanic on a modern car is a lot cleverer than I am, and I've got some pretty cool toys in the garage. So
he's being modest. He's being very modest. Just Google search him and the Goodwood Festival of Speed, you'll see.
All right. Lilly was actually my navigator in Africa in a rally, in a 7-day Karta rally in 2019. And she is an incredible ace. She has a 4-year degree in high performance motorsports and also can fix about anything, any kind of engine. So I'm really excited to see her now on the EV side, because now I know who I'm calling to continue being my navigator. And the great thing is it's, being a bit excited about all of this and not being afraid to jump in and learn something new. So here, a couple more questions. What can you please explain why ultra capacitors are not utilized in battery packs?
I'll dive. I'll bite. So I think I mentioned this earlier. It really comes down to energy density. So ultracapacitors are fantastic for being able to absorb energy and discharge energy very, very quickly, but it's very small amounts of energy. And so that's really what we're looking at. So in order for a battery pack, or I guess a ultracapacitor pack, to power a modern battery electric, you're looking at something that would be more than the volume of the entire car in order to pack the amount of energy into it to power said car. So back in my research days, we looked at hybrid models, so using ultracapacitors to be the regenerative braking mechanism, so you can capture more energy with an ultracapacitor and then bleed it off into the battery later, or maybe even use that for super rapid charging instances. But again, the technology is just really not there. That adds a ton of complexity to the system, and that's really it. It really comes down to ultracapacitor to energy density and just the overall technology, physics of the system.
Anybody else? We have a few more questions. They're more related to policies and groups that are interjecting, etc. Some people want to know if there's going to be an eGTI.
Kind of already was one, because we had the e-Golf, but we are making a product called the ID3 in Europe right now, which is sort of this, I would say, in that vein. So I would take a look at that. That could be something that we keep an eye on for this market, but it'll be a little ways off.
Well, everybody, I just have to say a huge thank you. Great conversation. Thank you to the crowd. What a great group of people. Excellent questions. People excited to learn. On the call, I do have the winners of the Rebelle Rally. I have Mercedes Lilienthal and that team from the Volkswagen. Once again, if you joined late, I think what's important to remember is that the Rebelle Rally created a platform for vehicles to shine. It didn't, that consumers buy. It's not just about, how they're powered. It's for what consumers buy. And the fact is they performed brilliantly. They got exceptional results. that wasn't an issue. So I think that that's something really important to remember. And I feel very fortunate that we have a partner like Renewable Innovations, and also the companies that work with them, a visionary like Bob, supporters from the manufacturers who believe in doing this, that trust us, trust the drivers and the consumers who drive them, and Bob, for taking a leap, because he didn't just step his toe in, he dove in, and we are looking at a scalable program. So right now, the Electrified program is something that is a beta, still beta. It's we take entries in from the manufacturers, unless the manufacturers are willing to support with engineering and powering, the cost for powering. If they're willing to do that, that's up to the manufacturer. We will have room for 6 fully electric vehicles, numerous plug-in hybrid electric vehicles, and we're also in the talks for hydrogen fuel cell, big rigs that can actually transport our infrastructure. So there's a lot in the works. Bob, thank you so much for being crazy. Lilly, Rivian, Mitsubishi, Jeep, Kia, Volkswagen, thanks for diving in and entering your vehicles. And to the teams had a lot of pressure on them. They had a lot of pressure, and they were not afraid, and they wanted to be a part of helping people, helping the process by learning more. So we really appreciate it, everyone. There's going to be information on our blog. There's also the Electrified vehicle link at the top that is helpful to watch, to kind of see a little bit more, especially if you joined in late. And if there are other questions, panel, I might reach out to you, because I know some of the people that have fielded these questions. But fantastic, and we're going to work toward a policy webinar. So thanks, everyone. Really appreciate it. And watch the Rebelle Rally. It's going to be October 6th through 15th. I hope those are the dates of 2022. And we'll be out there. So have a great day, everyone. Thank you.